Hello, and thank you for joining the Vidalia Onion Educational Conference as part of the 2021 Virtual Southeast Regional Fruit and Vegetable Conference. My name is Aubrey Shirley. I work with the Tattnall County Extension Office along with UGA, and I'll be the moderator for this presentation. Pesticide CEU and CCA credits are available for most presentations offered during the live Southeast Regional Conference. Check the Pesticide CEU guide for a list of approved presentations and participating states. A Pesticide CEU guide is located in the Event Resources tab under the Media player. The guide is also available at the Resources Center located on the main menu of their conference platform. Please note, pesticide credits will only be available for registered attendees and only during the live conference. Credits will not be available for on-demand viewing. There is a simple three-step process to receive pesticide CEU and CCA credits. First, go to the audience chat box located on the left-hand side of the screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. Again, go to the audience chat box located on the left side of your screen and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will need to do this for every presentation to request CEU credits. The second step is to sign out at the end of every presentation. To sign out, go to the audience chat box and type your first name, last name, and the states for which you are requesting credits. You will be reminded to sign out at the end of the presentation. The third step is to complete the pesticide CEU registration. You only have to complete this registration one time during the conference. This is not required with every presentation. To access the Pesticide CEU registration web link, open the Pesticide CEU guide and Event Resources tab located under the Media player. The Pesticide CEU registration web link is located on the front cover of the guide. This presentation is live, and we will also take questions at the end of the presentation as well. You can submit a question at any point during this presentation by typing your question in the question box and pressing send. And don't forget to thank our 2021 sponsors and exhibitors by visiting the virtual trade show and featured projects pavilion. And lastly, don't forget to join us each morning for coffee chats and each evening for networking. Check the conference agenda for details. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Angelos Deltsidis, Assistant Professor and UGA Post-Harvest Physiologist. He is going to be speaking on the strategies of post-harvest management of onions. And this is an important topic, especially in Vidalia onion region, to keep the onions fresh for, rather than just fresh shipping. And also it's important for shipping out of storage. And with that, I'll let him take over.
Thank you, Aubrey. Good afternoon, everyone. As Aubrey said, I'm Angelos Deltsidis. I'm a fairly new assistant professor here at UGA Tifton. I joined UGA in 2019, in the fall of 2019. And that's my second Southeast conference that I'm joining. So I'll be talking today about strategies of post-harvest management for onions, and I will talk, of course, about Vidalia onions as well. Starting, the Vidalia onions are short day onions, which require a shorter day length to form bulbs, and typically that's about 12 hours or under 12 hours. And for all fresh produce, quality is the most important factor when producing a marketable product. And we want to make sure we have the best quality for our buyers to achieve a good price. Unfortunately, there are many ways that the quality can degrade. And here is a schematic that shows ways that the quality, things can go wrong in onions. And if we start on the bottom right, you see there is often skin loss in onions, and that's not very much liked by the consumers. There's a sprouting, the top sprouting that also causes severe weight loss and renders the product unmarketable. There's rooting, that can happen to stored onions, skin cracking that is visually unpleasant. Of course, something really bad for the seller is water loss, which equals mass moisture loss. There's also disorders that happen internally and externally. Some disorders are mentioned here, like leathery scale or translucent scale, and you often have customers that are not happy because they are cutting their onions open and they see disorders in there. And last but not least, you have diseases, and that's kind of a Pandora's box. There's like fungal disease and bacterial diseases, but I won't be getting much into those. When we are about to harvest our crop, we need to make sure that our onions are mature. You don't want to harvest immature onions or over-mature onions. And how do you do that? How do you how does a farmer know when their crop is mature? Generally, for dry onions, maturity is indicated when approximately 10 to 20% of the tops has fallen over. However, this is a little different for Vidalia onions, so I'm going to talk about that later. Also, we know that the conversion from the active growth into dormancy is accelerated by undercutting the bulbs about 1 to 2 inches below the bulb. In a drier climates, we have a field dry maturity, which is indicated when bulb neck is completely dry and not slippery. And this is reached at 5 to 8% weight loss following harvest. Then we want to make sure that the quality of our harvest of our product is in a good shape. So we want to make sure we harvest only onions that have mature necks and scales. We want to make sure they are firm, they're not soft, they haven't softened for any reason, and that they have the appropriate diameter and bulb size according to the variety. Of course, there should be no decay. There should be no damage from insects. There's no sounds called. They shouldn't be green because of the sun exposure. There shouldn't be any sort of sprouting. Freezing injury is a problem that often occurs. It's usually post-harvest in our climate, and bruising and other defects can happen in the field or post-harvest. Our onions, the Vidalia onions, are sweet, so the degree of pungency is very important as a quality index. Let's talk about harvesting of onions. You guys know that onions are temperate climate plants, and they have a period of active growth, which is followed by a period of dormancy. In generally, the onions response to different environmental and climatic conditions is important because growers can take advantage of these changes and time their harvest appropriately. In order to maximize both yield and quality, onions should be harvested only when mature, not because the price is right or because we have space in our cauldrons. Bulbing is a stage that happens pretty quickly, and it occurs near the end of the active growth period. Usually, onion tops begin to fall over and die after bulbing, and we need to determine that the onions are mature. So we do that by pinching the neck of the growing onion. When the necks are stiff, the onions are still immature. For mature onions, we want to have soft and limber necks. In general, early varieties are more likely to break over the neck earlier and more uniformly, whereas later maturing varieties show about 20 to 50% of their tops broken at the neck for optimal maturity. And this is, of course, it's not the same every year, depending on the winter temperatures. Curing is an important part of the harvesting and handling process. In Georgia and much of the Southeast, artificial curing is needed to ensure maximum quality. The harvest time and the climatic conditions of our state is prevent in most cases, effective field drying. In Western states or in other dry climates, curing is done in the field. Here we need to help it a little bit artificially. Onions that have been undercut and have stayed in the field during warm, humid, or rainy weather are very susceptible to infection by decay organisms, and we should be careful not to leave them when such conditions are expected. As I mentioned, Georgia growers should not rely on field drying 100%, as they're taking a very big risk for the quality of the end product. Here is a picture of how undercutting is done. If you work with onions, you know how this is done. There's a rotating bar or a blade, and this bar is moving under the onions about 1 inch or 2 inches, making sure that it doesn't damage the base. The onions are rolled out of the ground and the roots are exposed. However, there's a problem often when there's excessive exposure of the bulbs to the sun. And, we have very high temperatures very often here during the harvesting season. This excessive bulb exposure will cause the onions to blister, and that's not something we want, because we start with a bad quality product, and there's no way to improve the quality of a product once it's been damaged in the field. The quality is going to go downhill from that point on. Onions should be harvested a few days after undercutting, and if there's a light rain or a heavy rain, onion beds should be probably undercut a second time to break the soil that has been attached again to the bulb. Drying in the field, again, it can be problematic in our state. It takes 3 to 5 days under dry conditions, and roots and tops of the onions should be removed. You want to cut the tops about 1.5 to 2 inches above the bulb, and cut the roots completely off. When you have extra short necks, this will increase the likelihood for disease infections. So you want to make sure you don't do that. 1.5 to 2 inches is what we're suggesting. It's very important to prevent injury to the bulbs throughout the harvesting and handling life of the product. Injuries can happen with the shears that workers are using, or by simply dropping the onions from height, or during packaging or the transportation of the product. For curing, there's many different ways of doing curing, and I will mention some of those. We have the field curing that I mentioned earlier, and then we have curing in a protected shade house, like the one you see on the top right picture. There's also curing done in storage rooms with slatted floors and heated air. The duration for curing is 1 to 4 weeks, and it depends on the conditions. It has been shown that the skin color is best at 75 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with a relative humidity of 70 to 80%. It's suggested that the heated air is at the same temperature as the target temperature, or otherwise we don't use really hot air to bring the onions to the temperature we want faster. You want to modify the airflow rate to make sure that the onion surfaces dry rapidly and that there's no water condensation at all. And if you have extremely wet onions, you would like to lower the humidity at least temporarily to 25 to 35% to remove the additional humidity from the room. Here are some pictures these are from the western part of the state where I used to work. This was in California. Over there, curing is done in the field, as I mentioned, and you see here hand harvesting of onions. Again, from the western part of the country, because it's a very dry location, there's curing done under sheds or under shade clothes. and they use a forced air or just natural ventilation. Let's talk about hand-harvested bulbs. I don't know how much this is done anymore, but you want to place hand-harvested bulbs in burlap or mesh bags in the field, and then transport them to packing sheds. Large bin boxes should be moved using forklifts to transport them. And you want to make sure that you always handle carefully the onions to avoid any external or internal damage. Loading and unloading of onions is a point where a lot of damage occurs. And of course, walking or standing on bags of onions should be avoided. And I see it more often than I would expect. You need to know that any damage that you do to the bulb throughout its post-harvest life is cumulative, and often it will manifest itself much later, and you won't be able to see it. Maybe the end consumer will see it, and then there will be a hat with your product or return your product, and you'll incur a financial loss. You want to have about more than 6% of vent space in bins or boxes for dry onions, and it is recommended that bins are immediately placed on a drying system after harvest. We know that the roots usually shrivel during curing, and then they're knocked off in the packing line as the onions move through it, and next dry during curing, and then they eventually fold over when handled. Some tips is that undercutting several days before harvest can improve storage quality. A suggestion is to undercut when most of the plants have two leaves that are still partially green. It has been used by some farmers that I know. And allowing, in general, leaves to completely dry down before undercutting can result in skin loss during harvest and in the post-harvest life of the product. After curing, you want to store your product to a low temperature, and you want to go as low as possible, close to 32 degrees, which means that you're going to get as close to freezing point without freezing them. However, cooling the product too rapidly, followed by warm days, can cause condensation on the bulbs, and these will result in staining, sprouting, and decay, which are disorders that nobody wants to see. Overall, maintaining a relative humidity in the storage place of about 60 to 75% and sufficient airflow is ideal to keep your onions in a good shape. For storage, here are some suggestions for, depending on how long you want to store them for. 32 to 36 degrees Fahrenheit for longer term storage. When you have dry onions for 1 to 2 months, it's 68 to 86. Vidalia onions often don't do well in this temperature. So reach out to me if you have questions about Vidalia onions that need to be stored for a shorter period of time. In general, 41 to 65 favor sprout growth and should be avoided. Again, the humidity, a good humidity is 60 to 75%. And it has been shown that this percentage of humidity reduces molds and rooting overall. It's very important during storage to know that if you have other product other than onions in your storage place, odor is very easily transferred from onions to other products. So you might have collateral damage by storing another product that needs the same temperature, because you're going to end up having a product that smells like onion, and usually that's not likable much by the consumers. Again, I can't stress enough that you want to harvest only mature onions, and consideration for you guys is not to over-fertilize or over-water right before harvest. It's been shown that withholding nitrogen fertilization a month to a month and a half before harvest, and withholding irrigation 1 to 2 weeks before harvest has, as a result, a better quality of onions. Again, harvesting and handling onions should be done carefully to avoid damage, and storing should be done only for well-cured onions. Long-term storage. Back in the day, Georgia and other onion-producing states were using controlled atmosphere storage. From what I know, this is not the case anymore. The industry has moved away from it. So now they are using refrigerated common storage rooms to store their onions until they get crop from South America to fill the gaps. And this way they can provide onions to their consumers year-round. It's very important to mention that onions freeze at about 31 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't want to get at that point or below that. Freezing, as with all disorders, has cumulative effects. So if you have several short periods below 31 degrees Fahrenheit, these can be just as damaging as a single longer period at the same temperature. So meaning, don't think that you can put your product at 30 degrees for 5 times in a year and that won't have any problem because it's not long enough to cause damage. It'll have a cumulative effect, and overall the quality will deteriorate rapidly. Generally, dry onions, even in good condition that are stored above 50 degrees, will have sprouting, as the one you can see on the right. And sprouting in onions causes them to be not marketable anymore because you have decay and severe weight loss. There is a chemical that I haven't used personally, but I have read about. It's called malic hydrazide, and it's an inhibitor that can be applied to onions when about 50% of the tops are down, the bulb are mature, and the necks are soft. It's being used by many people in the industry. Here is a table that can show you the effect of storage time and temperature on onion losses. And we're talking post-harvest temperatures of storage. So you see, we have 4 different storage periods: 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months. And we have 3 different storage temperatures: 70 degrees, 40 degrees, and 34 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see what percentage of weight loss we had, percentage of loss actually we had at various temperature. So the lower the temperature, the lower the loss that we had, but also the shorter the storage time, the less of product, of course, we had deteriorating. So you can tell that in very short storage periods, let's say 2 weeks, pretty much 34 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit have the same percentage of losses. However, the longer you store your product, the more profound the increased losses are. You can see for 6 months, you have 14% of losses for 34 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas for 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you have 62% of the product being discarded. That's just an example to show you, to give you an idea of how important temperature management is. Let's talk about the onion storage area. You need to make sure that the area is clean, is kept well ventilated, dry and cool, and there is no fluctuations in the temperature. You want to remove periodically all decayed and moldy onions as soon as possible, and you want to carefully rotate the onions when needed. When moving product around, pay attention not to drop them or dump them, because as I mentioned earlier, you will cause them to have mechanical injuries, mechanical damage. Here is a table that I won't get much into it. It talks about all the onions and the storability, depending on when they were harvested, sweetness and so on. I will move into grading and packing. We have substantial damage usually happening during this period, and it comes in the form of bruises, scrapes, and cuts that are again cumulative and evident later. In your packing house, bruised onions may appear acceptable with no evidence of damage at that point. However, a week or 2 weeks later, they can get rejected by your end customer because the extent of damage is apparent and they're not marketable anymore. The most common forms of damage is bruising and cutting that happens when onions strike unprotected surfaces, and especially pointed surfaces. So you want to cover those and make sure there's no big drops, high drops in your packing line. Losses can be reduced by up to 25% by padding those surfaces using cushions along the grading and packing lines. Foam is a good cushioning material. And of course, reducing the drop heights below the grader and other points is a good remedy. Here are some common packaging types. You know these probably better than me. There's many different sizes of mesh bags and consumer-sized bags that are being used. However, bags are offering very little protection to the product, and they can subject the onions to severe damage if they're mishandled. There are USDA grade standards depending on the onion type, and price is usually determined by the size. And onions again should be transported and stored separately from other kinds of products, because fruits and vegetables will absorb the odor of onions, and well-dried onions will draw moisture from fresh vegetables if they're stored in the same container, in the same cauldron. Going towards the end, here are some physiological and physical disorders. Freezing injury is a problem. We have soft water-soaked areas and the decay growing. Translucency is a problem that looks like freezing injury and can be prevented by cold storage after curing, prompt cold storage. Greening is when you expose your bulbs to light. And ammonia injury used to happen a lot in the past. From what I know, it's blotches that are brown or black, and they're because of ammonia gas leaking in the storage room. Because of the special nature of Vidalia onions that have high water content compared to other onions, this contributes to the sweet taste, which is what people like, but it also shortens the shelf life and makes them more susceptible to bruising. So a key to preserving Vidalias in a good condition is to keep them cool, dry, and separated from other products. So if you were to have three take-home messages, keep your onions at a low temperature, dry, and separated from other products. With that, I'd like to thank you all for attending this presentation. I have my email here if you have any questions, but I'll be happy to take any questions if we have any time left.
Thank you, Dr. Deltsidis. Like you said, it's time to take any questions. And if you are requesting pesticide credit from the presentation, don't forget to sign out of the presentation. Go to the audience chat box and type your first name, last name, and states for which you are requesting credit. So with that, does anybody have any questions? Get a few more.
No questions?
I don't see any. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you again, Dr. Deltsidis. Thank you for attending the presentation, and don't forget to sign out if you are requesting pesticide credits in the audience chat box. All educational presentations and the virtual trade show will be available for you to access until April 30th, 2021. So come back if you missed a presentation or just want to rewatch one, or if you need to search for a service or product provider in the virtual trade show. Again, thank you for your participation, and this concludes the presentation.